Okay, so this is my presentation, and it's very much a work in progress. I've been happy to be the recipient of a grant from the Culture and Animals Foundation, and what I'm presenting is work that I've done under the context of that grant. So I'm really looking forward to your views and comments because this is really a new area for me. So as the person introducing me said, I've mainly been working on health, human health, and I've done a lot of work for the United Nations, and I'm based in the US and I'm Canadian. So the focus of my presentation is mainly about industrial animal agriculture and how it interacts with the Sustainable Development Goals. So this is the structure of my presentation. The first thing I'm going to do is talk a little bit about what are the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs for short. And I'm sure some of you know all about it and others of you may not, so I apologize if I'm telling you things you already know. I just want to make sure we all know that. And then the second part of the presentation is about the way that animal rights impact the Sustainable Development Goals. And mine is that this has not gotten close to the amount of attention it deserves in the global development discourse, and it should. And the final part of my presentation is some ideas about how animal rights activists can become engaged in these discussions, because it seems to me that sometimes global development discussions and discourse is going on in one space, and animal rights is sometimes in another space, and my hope is to bring these two together. So what are the Sustainable Development Goals? This is from the UN website, so I'm just going to read it. There are 17 Sustainable Development Goals. The Sustainable Development Goals are the blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. They address the global challenges that we face, including those related to poverty, inequality, climate change, environmental degradation, peace, and justice. There are 17 goals, and they're all interconnected, which you'll see when we discuss them. And in order to leave no one behind, it's important we achieve them all by 20. So this is the goal, the UN goal. So if you worked in the UN system or you know anything about the UN, they're always setting goals and rarely are they met, but it's still very useful exercise, I think, to try to set those goals and to attempt to meet them, even if it's not always feasible. So these are the 17 goals, and I'm not going to discuss all of them. Almost all of them, we could think about an animal rights perspective on all of them, of course, but I've just picked a few. So I'm just going to briefly go over what these are. The first is no poverty. The second is zero hunger. You see, it's very ambitious by 2030. Good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation and infrastructure, reduced inequalities, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, we will discuss that, life on land, we will discuss that, peace, justice, and strong institutions. Those, and 17, partnership for the goals. So those are the 17 very ambitious sustainable development goals that the United Nations has laid out. So I'm just I have a quick slide here about why the focus right now on industrial animal agriculture. Of course, there are many important aspects about animal rights that need attention. I've just picked this particular one and I'm relating it to the Sustainable Development Goals. So there are several points that I'd like to make about industrial animal agriculture. One is it's a relatively new phenomenon. In the past, humans did not consume animals and animal products at the astounding rate that we consume them today. So for example, in 1950, and I apologize, a lot of my data is from the US. I think global data is needed too. And I hope to include that in the future. But in the US in 1950, the US population was slightly over 150 million, and 100 million farm animals were slaughtered, which is approximately 1.5 farm animals per American per year. And that ratio now is 32. So you can see 32 to 1. And we have about 25 million farm animals killed every single day in the United States for human consumption. So you can see this astounding growth since the middle of the last century. And also globally, as I'm sure you all know, demand is growing exponentially, especially in developing countries, but all over really. And this is a facet of two interconnected trends. One is the view that the consumption of meat and other animal products is somehow prestigious. It's an example set by wealthier countries, and that developing countries, there are people who believe that it's prestigious to eat meat, and therefore there's more demand for it. The wealthier the countries get, the more the demand for meat grows. And the other is purely a business trend, which is the export of the factory farming system, which is, as you know, a business. So it is being exported to developing countries, and so these systems are growing. So I just wanted to make these points about industrial animal agriculture, which we can all keep in mind as I go through some examples of the way that animals, animal rights, and industrial animal agriculture intersect with the Sustainable Development Goals. So here's a few of the goals I've selected to discuss with you today. One is the SDG 2, which is zero hunger. And the way that the United Nations has articulated this goal, it's end hunger, achieve food security, and improve nutrition, and promote sustainable agriculture. That is the goal. This does not, as you can see, none of these really include any kind of a focus on animal rights or on reducing meat consumption. It's not in this SDG at all, and my hope is in the future it will be. So here are a few points about the ways that industrial animal agriculture actually can exacerbate hunger. It can make more people hungry. So one way that this has happened is that in developing areas, especially in East Africa and in parts of Latin America, communities that were previously food sufficient, they produced their own food on their own land. They have now seen that land purchased or sometimes expropriated, and it's converted into pasture to graze cattle, or it's converted into vast fields to grow wheat and soy that is then fed to cattle. And those meat products are mainly consumed in wealthy countries. So as a result of this, 82% of the world's malnourished children live in countries where locally grown food, instead of being eaten by humans, is fed to animals who are then killed and sold to consumers in wealthy countries. This is the way that, this system actually exacerbates hunger. So let's look at another one, SDG 3. I'll just go over this very quickly because I'm sure that you are all very aware of this one, which is good health and well-being. The goal is to ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages. That's how they've articulated it. Oops. And so very quickly, of course, eating animal products is simply unhealthy and is linked to a range of diseases. And I am not an expert in this area. The area is very well researched and written about, and I'm sure you've all seen the excellent work that's been going on in this area for many, many years, linking meat and dairy consumption to diseases such as cancer, heart disease, diabetes, and obesity. And most recently, of course, the link that is increasingly, we are all very aware of, and that's being researched in more detail now, between consumption of animals and zoonotic diseases like COVID-19. SDG 6, clean water and sanitation. This one is articulated as ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. So this SDG also interacts with animal rights and agriculture. So the overutilization of water resources and contamination of water sources is a direct consequence of industrial animal agriculture and degrades water sources. So on a per kilogram basis, beef production requires 9 times the water of cereals. This is not my own research. I am gathering the excellent research that's been done by so many people and thinking about ways to present that as to show how it intersects with these SDGs. And the third point I have here, an illustration, 55% of the water consumed in the United States goes to animal agriculture, and this strains surface and groundwater resources, contaminates rivers and oceans. The next one is SDG 10, reduce inequalities. And this one is articulated as reduce inequality within and among countries. And I think that this is an area that deserves even more attention. It already has attention and it deserves even more. To conceptualize animal rights as the social and political issue that it is. So, what I found doing my reading is that animal agriculture actually exacerbate inequalities, and this has been pointed out for years in our movement. So it's linked to social justice movements, those that started in the 1960s and before, and it builds on important work done by so many people, including Frances Moore Lappé, whose book I'm sure you all know, Diet for a Small Planet, in which she argued that that large-scale animal agriculture would have devastating consequences for social justice, food inequality, and the environment. And she pointed out that as long as the poor and hungry cannot pay, grain and soybean growers will find it more profitable to sell to the rich countries where food will be called feed and reduced to a tiny fraction of its real potential. So in the earlier discussion that we had just now about hunger, for example, I think the social inequality issues and the social justice issues were already very much in evidence, that as a result of this extractive system and this burgeoning system whereby the industrial animal agricultural complex is growing so rapidly, those who are most vulnerable in poor and developing countries are becoming more vulnerable and hungrier due to that, despite the fact, of course, that in many ways the developing countries are developing, but they could be doing much better if it wasn't for this system. And those in wealthy countries are exploiting that situation through dietary choice and because of the system that promotes it. So social justice, I think, is a critical component that needs to be discussed more and is, of course, linked to this SDG. So the next one is climate action, urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. And this also has received a lot of attention and a lot of excellent research and documentary films and a lot of writing about this, the interaction between industrial animal agriculture and climate change. But I think that this needs to be brought into the United Nations discourse on climate action, because it has not yet, despite a lot of effort, has not yet adequately permeated that discourse by a long way. So animal agriculture contributes to climate change, and here are some of the examples of the ways in which it contributes to climate change. This is not a complete list. There's I've just selected some examples. Animal agriculture produces more greenhouse gas emissions than all cars, planes, trains, and ships combined. Cutting forests to grow animal feed and provide pasture for farm animals drives carbon dioxide emissions and is the largest global source of methane and nitrous oxide. Both are potent greenhouse gases produced by enteric fermentation, manure, and fertilizers for growing animal feed. And just as an example, in the United States, factory farms produce 500 million tons of manure each year, more than 3 times the sewage from the entire US human population. SDG 14, below the water. So another area that many of us in our movement have worked on, conserve and sustainably use the oceans, seas, and marine resources for sustainable development. And already I'm sure you can see there's very many problematic words in the way that this SDG is formulated, such as the use of the word use, which is something that I think we need to question. So here are just a few points about the oceans and the ways in which they have been exploited. 1/3 of the world's wild-caught fisheries are now depleted because of overfishing, pollution, and the effects of climate change. And as a result, we have aquaculture, fish farming, which is a sector that now accounts for more than half of worldwide seafood production. And aquaculture practices have degraded coastal ecosystems, polluting the oceans with waste and destroying critical habitats. And I think this might be almost the last one. SDG 15, life on land, protect, restore, and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, sustainably manage forests, combat desertification, and halt and reverse land degradation, and halt biodiversity loss. So this is the goal that the United Nations has set out in their Sustainable Development Goal number 15. So let's have a look at the ways that animal agriculture interacts with this particular SDG. So animal agriculture decimates ecosystems and degrades biodiversity in so many ways. And here are some examples. Animal agriculture directly contributes to deforestation globally, which we've already discussed when we were discussing land use. The ways in which forests and rainforests, for example, are raised in order to graze animals or to grow feed to animals who are then slaughtered. And then deforestation, land conversion, degradation of grasslands, and desertification due to animal agriculture accounts for 30% of global biodiversity loss. And so here I just listed a few resources about ways to get involved, and this is an evolving project for me. So this is a few things that I found particularly useful, ways for our movement to become debates, and I really welcome any suggestions from the audience. So first is this AITC, World Animal Net, the Animal Interest Thematic Cluster. You can look it up online, and they have actually directly been engaged with the process of formulating and implementing the SDGs and working really hard to interject animal concerns into the SDGs. So really doing fantastic work. The second one is the International Conference on Sustainable Development, which is happening in 2 weeks actually. It's a virtual conference. This is the website for it that I've put here. You can join for free if you want. This is an annual conference. It's largely academic. That looks at the sustainable development goals and the process of sustainable development in general. It does not include generally an animal rights component, but this year it does because I'm presenting at it. So I think that the more of us who can get involved in these kinds of conferences to amplify the message, the better. There are other ones. I just found this one and thought it was particularly useful. It usually takes place at Columbia University in New York, but this year it's virtual, so that's a great opportunity, I think, for many of us. There's a series of webinars, and this is a new one that's starting next week. At the top here, you can see animalsclimatehealth.com, and this is the website for it. You can join that webinar for free, and they are discussing a number of these issues that are directly related to the Sustainable Development Goals. And then finally, this is a resource which I found it was excellent. You can Google it and download it. It's from the AITC, and it gives examples of ways in which the SDGs are interacting with animal rights and projects that are currently underway to address that. And they have engaged with several of the SDGs that are not the ones that I mentioned in this presentation, so could be really quite useful, I think, for you. So I think that completes my presentation. Yeah, this is my email address. If any of you would like to contact me, I'd love to hear from you and meet you virtually, because this is something that I'm going to be working on for quite some time. I'm going to be writing a paper about this, which I hope to share. So anybody who'd like to contact me, please go ahead. That's it. I think I should stop sharing now, right?
Oh, it's fine. Thank you very much, Katya, for your talk. Yeah, we have a few questions now, but feel free to type in more questions because we still have some time, and yeah, we can cover more than we already got, I think.
I made a mistake in the math, sorry. Yes. Somebody wrote that. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, the first question for you, Katya, would be why do you think is it so hard to promote change at international institutions, and the evidence of the link between animal rights and social justice and a better life for all is clear? So why do you think it's still so difficult to promote change in those organizations?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's such a difficult question. And I honestly can say, I don't know. But I can tell you a story that may be a good illustration, which was, as some of you may know, a few years ago, the World Health Organization put out a study about the impact of meat on health. And it was specifically on processed meats. And it said that processed meats are carcinogenic. And that publication was withdrawn. So they did put it, they did actually put it out, but that publication was withdrawn, and there was a very vocal and sustained and effective effort to suppress it on the part of the meat industry. I think the meat industry is incredibly well organized. They and the dairy industry. I mean, you know, I was born in the 60s. I remember the ads about milk. You know, very effective. So we need to think of two things. One, a way to counteract that that incredibly effective machine, and two, ways to in terms of advertisement and ways to counteract it in terms of strategy. And the other thing we have to understand is they are incredibly well funded. That's another area that's another reason why it's really quite difficult. I mean, you have to remember that at the international level, the United Nations gets its money from governments. One of the biggest donors is the US government, you know, and governments are often beholden to business, and that means the agricultural sector.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
But we need more of the Greta Thunberg. She's making a lot of progress.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, first of all, amazing talk and work. Some parts of the global international development sector actively subsidize industrial animal agriculture, like the World Bank, and other subsidize very problematic systems. Would love to hear your view on this. So this actually, I think this is more or less what you already told us beforehand, but yeah.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. And it's not just the World Bank too. I mean, you've probably seen the, even like small grassroots projects, which are help a village, send them a cow, you know. You've seen these kinds of things. I've seen it in action, actually. And, you know, people are actually well-meaning. It hasn't occurred to them that what they're doing to that cow, or that the entire endeavor is not sustainable. Obviously, you know, not going to feed a village. Yeah, I think it's problematic. I think that there are several reasons for it. Sometimes it's just lack of adequate education about it. We can address that, right? But sometimes it's because of the source of the funding that it can go back to the agricultural lobby.
Yeah, that's a big problem. Okay, thank you. The next question is, should policy-making processes change in order to get more viewpoints actively involved? I'm not sure what policy-making processes, that's a very big...
I mean, I think that UN processes are evolving to include what we call civil society more and more. And that means people who are, I mean, in international health, people who are affected by various diseases, those organizations themselves are more and more involved. Maybe one thing, of course, it would be better to have what we want to see is members of our movement engaged in those discussions. So I think perhaps, I mean, I don't know, perhaps thinking about ways to organize our movement in a transnational way, which we're already doing in this conference, but even to strengthen it more in order to have an effective lobby that can really go to the UN.
Mm-hmm.
I can see some of the questions.
Yeah,
Somebody
sure.
has a special issue on animal welfare in the United Nations Development Goals, end of November. Oh, look at this. Who wrote this? This is very interesting.
What are you referring to?
I'm looking at the Q&A.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. There's 3 of them. I don't know who these people are.
Yeah, sure, right. These are some of the questions the people ask. The next one, which we can answer maybe, could you mention some good examples that you saw where organizations and governments do take animal into account when making the SDGs happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one that's done the best is the one that I've seen is the one that I mentioned in the slides.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be, yeah, this World Animal Net that's been, and that organized this animal interest thematic cluster. They have a website and I would encourage you to look at it. I think that they were able to interject animal-friendly language into several of the sub-goals underneath this Sustainable Development Goals. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yes, I see the good examples. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And then there's another question. Great talk. Thank you. Was just wondering which session are you speaking at the Sustainable Development Conference? And
Yeah,
that's a good session.
Thanks. Sorry. Yeah, that's a complicated conference because they have several sessions. So it's parallel session 4 on September 21st, and I think it's 4A.
Okay. Okay, and then there's one more question, I think.
Raquel?
Yeah, right. Yeah. I reckon the impact and importance of making animal rights more visible through UN's SDGs. On the other hand, I would also like to learn more about the contradictive regulations, for instance, that farm and animal agriculture either at global or national levels. Where can we learn about these regulations and contradictions and how to make them more visible? Are you aware of academic work that contrasts those? So that's very long.
Yeah, that's such a good point. So I guess there's 2 main things that I would suggest. One is the, you know, a lot of it comes down to the national dietary guidelines. I don't know if you've looked at the national dietary guidelines, whether or not they put in there that meat and dairy is healthy. I know in the US and Canada, it can be quite a fight every time those are revised. So if you look at those guidelines, you can find documentation about the debate as well. That is the crux of the matter, so to speak. All the subsidies for the agricultural sector, the animal agricultural sector, flow from that. So I guess starting to look and research the dietary guidelines would be, for various countries, would be one step. But you're right, there isn't enough research on this, actually. Sorry. I guess that's the main. I know there was a book that also looked at it, but it might be Eating Animals. I don't know if you've seen that book, but I know that he did some research on it, definitely. Yeah.